Let's talk about something called desire reinforcement. The most striking truth about it is that the most powerful way to control someone isn't to give them what they want, it's to give them exactly 1% of it, and at totally unpredictable times. We tend to assume that people stay in relationships where they feel loved, right? But in these really high-pressure dynamics, your own biological drive, that need for the win, for the payout, it gets turned against you. It turns a starved connection into a neurochemical addiction that you feel like you physically can't quit. Why does the person who ignores you for weeks suddenly feel more magnetic than the person who's always there for you? Well, that is the core paradox of what's known as intermittent reinforcement. It's the exact moment your desire for consistency gets turned into the mechanism of your own psychological capture.
This one paradox, right here, this is the engine of the entire system we are about to deconstruct. And really understanding it, really getting it, is the very first step to reclaiming your own agency.
So, to really get a grip on this architecture, we're going to walk through 5 key stages. We'll kick things off with the 1% reward paradox. Then we'll explore something called affective starvation. From there, we'll dissect the capture cycle and the psychology behind the attention monopoly. And finally, we'll look at the path from just being in it to having real awareness.
Okay, let's dive right into the central puzzle, the 1% reward paradox. How is it even possible that getting less affection, less validation, can actually create a stronger bond, a stronger sense of pursuit? Well, the answer isn't really found in our emotions, but in our brain chemistry.
Now, this isn't just some fringe theory. Nope, this is a well-documented cognitive principle called variable ratio reinforcement, and trust me, it is everywhere. It's the engine that drives the entire gambling industry. You know that almost win feeling that keeps you pulling the lever? That's it. It's used in corporate cultures where the potential for a huge bonus drives people to work punishing hours, and it is the absolute core of any dynamic where unpredictable rewards create an unbreakable, laser-like focus.
So that brings us to the really critical question, right? If we know this is a biological mechanism, how does it actually get used on a personal level? How does a system take something as pure as hope? The hope for connection, for consistency, for that amazing good feeling to come back and completely weaponize it, turning it into a leash that keeps you tethered to the very source of your own starvation.
All right, section 2, affective starvation. You see, before that 1% reward can even work, the right environment has to be created. This is all about manufacturing a very specific kind of hunger. This is the setup for control.
So the goal of affective starvation is to manage a person's internal state, basically keeping their dopamine tank perpetually running on fumes. This creates this profound neurochemical deficit, where the brain becomes absolutely desperate for any little hit of validation, making it incredibly susceptible to even the smallest rewards.
Now, this state of starvation is maintained by 2 incredibly powerful beliefs that just lock a person into the cycle. First, you've got the possibility hook. This is that little voice in your head that says, "It was so good at the beginning. If I just try a little harder, if I'm just better, we can get that back." It completely reframes the problem as your failure. And the second is reward vertigo, that dizzying, almost physical rush of relief you feel when, after days or even weeks of silence, you finally get that text back. That feeling is so intense it completely blinds you to all the pain that came before it.
And what this creates is this really stark power dynamic. You have the dealer, who controls the supply of attention and carefully calibrates their availability, and then you have the chaser, who becomes totally laser-focused on getting that next hit. And over time, the chaser, they lose their habit of satisfaction. They start to see the tiniest crumbs of attention as a magnificent feast.
Okay, section 3, the capture cycle. Now that we understand the setup, let's look at the actual mechanism of the trap itself. This is the repeatable sequence that conditions the brain.
It happens in 3 really distinct phases. First is what we call anchoring. This is the love bombing stage, where you are just flooded with attention, with validation, with connection. The goal here is to establish a really high dopamine baseline to make you feel electrified, like you're finally seen. Then comes phase 2, the throttling. All of that attention is suddenly and totally inexplicably withdrawn. This triggers a primal panic, what's called separation distress, and you immediately start scrambling, trying to figure out what you did wrong. And just as that panic is peaking, we hit phase 3, precision reinforcement. At your absolute lowest point, the controller offers a tiny micro-reward, a kind word, a brief moment of warmth. Your brain just latches onto this as proof that things can be good again, and that creates a powerful, powerful lock-in effect. The result of this cycle, when it's repeated over and over again, is something called compulsive pursuit. This is a fundamental rewiring of your entire reward system. Your brain is literally being conditioned to find stable, consistent affection and love as boring. It just doesn't provide a dopamine rush anymore. Instead, the roller coaster of intermittent starvation, that anxiety followed by that intense relief, is misinterpreted as passion and intensity.
All right, Section 4, the total attention monopoly. We've seen the what and the how, so now let's explore the why. What is the psychological motivation behind this whole dynamic? Well, it's about the quest for control.
And let's be really clear about this. This isn't about weakness of character. Not at all. It's a biological fact. A slot machine relationship is nearly impossible to quit because the human brain is simply not built to walk away from intermittent rewards. You always feel like the next pull of the lever is gonna be the jackpot.
So, let's look at both sides of the coin here. The controller's motivation is often about gaining what we call a total attention monopoly. See, if they can become the sole source of your validation and your relief, they gain immense leverage over your behavior. You'll do almost anything to avoid the pain of their withdrawal. And on the other side, the target's vulnerability is often a very human, very healthy trait, the need for consistency. This system hijacks that natural desire for a stable connection and turns it into the very mechanism of control.
Okay, in our final section, we're going to shift from just explaining this whole thing to actually empowering you. How do you dismantle the system and reclaim your own sovereignty? It really begins with two powerful awareness tools.
The first tool is called the average audit. It's a simple, but honestly a really profound mental shift. Instead of judging the relationship by its rare euphoric peak moments, those moments of incredible relief and connection, you consciously choose to analyze its daily baseline. What is the average day-to-day reality of this connection? The goal here is to see things clearly, to recognize if what you've been calling passion is actually just the feeling of withdrawal.
And this is exactly why the average audit is so critical. Those peak moments, they're intensely memorable, right? They're like a 95 out of 100 that just colors your entire perception. But the daily baseline? It might be a 15. The audit forces you to weigh the evidence properly, and it prevents that 1% of euphoria from completely erasing the 99% of starvation.
The second tool is extinction awareness. Once you can see the pattern, this is all about breaking it. It means making the conscious choice to stop the pursuit. You stop sending that extra text, you stop trying to fix things, and then you simply observe the biological itch that comes up. You'll feel the anxiety, that desperate urge to chase, but you recognize it for what it is, a conditioned biological response, not a sign of true connection, and you don't act on it.
And this is why awareness is the whole key. Just labeling the feeling as a withdrawal symptom and not as love is what interrupts the neurochemical cycle. It creates that tiny bit of space between your impulse and your action. And this is what stops that executive tunneling effect, where your brain gets so focused on the next reward that it loses all wider context. This is how you reclaim your agency.
Ultimately, it all comes down to this one powerful truth. A person who feeds you crumbs is not trying to fill you up. They are trying to keep you hungry. Hunger gives them leverage. Hunger keeps you chasing. Real connection? Well, that's a steady stream, not a dripping faucet that you have to beg for.
Just seeing the architecture, that's the crucial first step. It allows you to depersonalize the dynamic and really understand the mechanics at play. So the final question I want to leave you with is this. Now that you can see the architecture, where do you draw the blueprint for your own sovereignty?